Hello, Kathy.
Hey,
How are
Martin.
you?
I am good. It's really great to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, thank you for accepting it. Yes, well, I should talk about the fact that I keep missing diary dates because I keep getting the timing wrong in Central America, is it? So, first of all, Kathy, who are you and what do you do? How about that?
Well, I'm a consultant, an author, a leadership coach. My area of coaching is at the intersection of change, innovation, and leadership. And so I tend to attract people who want me to coach them, who are trying to do large scale change work in some portion of their lives, either their organization or their community or the world, in terms of sustainability, creating regenerative design, things like that. And it's a wonderful place. I write a blog, a weekly blog on how we can learn from nature, the longest running regenerative system in our world, 3.2, 3.8 billion years of research and development. So, our minds have been stuffed with ideas about how we're supposed to treat people and how we're supposed to run organizations and lead organizations that have come out of a mechanistic framework, which then leads us down to kind of exploiting and extracting. So we extract things from nature and we exploit people and talent for private profit because we've been taught to optimize a part of the system, like making money, over the whole system, like the impact of our choices over time to the earth and to people and our communities, that making money is more important than anything else. But in regenerative systems, you have to optimize the whole system. You can't just optimize a part of the system. And we are now living with the consequences of inheriting all of these odd thoughts that have been around for over 100 years when we really started exploding organizations back in the early 1900s. And we now have the consequences of those choices, which is basically a climate that is giving us feedback every single day that we're in trouble.
It's not going well, is it?
So
Why
maybe
we're
it's
laughing?
time.
Like
Maybe
gallows
it's
humor.
time to shift our consciousness or shift the way we're thinking about it. So I've looked at nature to help me understand that, and it is a beautiful exercise to reveal those hidden assumptions that we all have of what normal actions are and what rational actions are. So nature always brings me up and says, oh, maybe controlling people really isn't the best way to move forward, or maybe extracting or exploiting, creating an organization or a society based on exploiting people below you is not necessarily a good thing. So maybe we should think of another way. Nature has another way.
Yeah, using nature as you say, a mentor that's 3.8 billion years old.
And it's gone through 5 mass extinctions and life continues. So there's something deep wisdom in the design that if we paid attention to it, we could learn from and redesign our organizations.
Yeah. So how did you get on that journey? What started this? Let's go back to that bit, because that's, I mean, this is fascinating. This would take days, but just how did you get here?
Yeah, well, that's a convoluted journey for sure. I think that my attachment to nature has been with me since I was a kid. I love, spending the summers outside and in nature and hiking and whatnot. So I've always had that, resonance with nature and have felt good about being in nature. But my own journey has been, I worked in organizations for the first 25 years of my life. I worked in higher education primarily, up to with 14 of those years at the VP level. And then I just kind of got burnt out on administration and organizational craziness,
Yeah.
and decided, and I was being drawn into the next iteration of my life, which then I decided I'd just take a leap of faith and start my own consulting practice.
Wow.
And that's worked out really well. I've been doing that for 22 years now. And then around that same time, I started working with clients who were trying to figure out how to create more integrated organizations and integrated leadership teams. So instead of having a leadership team where individuals on that team saw themselves as representing primarily their area of the organization, things were becoming much more complex. The rise of complexity in the 90s, decades of the 90s, was stunning. And so what was happening is these really good, effective leaders needed more company at the leadership table that was caring about the whole organization instead of just a part of the organization.
Yeah. Right.
So I started looking for models, and most of our business practices weren't really talking about the language of integration at that point. So this is like, 2000, 1995, 98, in there. And so I started, as I've always done, I've always read outside of my field to solve problems in my field, because I love this kind of paraphrasing of a quote from Danella Meadows, who's a systems thinker, writer, beautiful articulation of systems. But she always says that in order to shift the system, you have to transcend the mindset that the system is currently operating at.
Yes.
So for me, reading outside the field is a good thing. And it helps me transcend the mindset that I'm unconscious of.
Sure.
And so I started I started with the question, well, what discipline actually thinks in whole systems and integration? And that got me to the sustainability field. And I started reading in that. And then that got me to a book called Biomimicry by Jeannie Benyus. And that book just exploded the way I was thinking, because it really introduced nature's design principles to me. And I knew that I had always kind of understood that systems were living systems, but there was something about biomimicry that there added a whole new layer of design. And so that became kind of a thing that I wanted to experiment with. And I'm lucky in my clients, because my clients like to experiment too. And so
that could almost be, how do you find those kind of clients? That's the secret ingredient, isn't it? It's like how do you find the people that are willing to let you play and experiment? Yeah.
Right. Well, I think the people who find me are the people who want to shift the way they're thinking. They're basically people who are extraordinarily good at traditional leadership. And they basically realize at some point, they've already come to the realization that traditional leadership is not going to be sufficient for where they want the organization to evolve.
Yeah.
So I started talking about these ideas, and they said, well, let's go play. And so we started doing deep culture change, for example, in an organization, and but with a living system framework. And instead of we got to get all these cogs moving in the same direction, and what are the leverage points that will get the machine moving and running in the way we want, right? So that changed the way we thought about leadership. So instead of what do we need to control, we started asking, what do we need to unleash? And instead of who's going to make this work, we said, well, what interactions in an interdependent living system will help create something that is lasting and will hold and be a significant change for the organization? So we started playing, and then after 15 years of playing, about in 2015, I just felt that I had enough thinking, enough experimenting, enough practice, enough results to know that this was powerful, that I decided I better write a book and explain it to others. So
Leading from the roots.
that's it. That's the book.
Lots of tag marks in bent corners, I'm afraid, but scribbles and highlighting.
Yeah.
But yeah, an excellent book, Leading from the Roots, Nature-Inspired Leadership, Lessons for Today's World. I'll leave a link in the comments below.
I've always struggled with people who write books but have never practiced their theories. And so for me, for the authenticity of my voice to come through, I've always felt that you had to make sure that what you're thinking works before you go off and write a book on it.
Yep, lived experience, can't beat it. That's right. It was, yeah, it's funny because we were talking before about politics, and you asked the question, when will Boris Johnson finally go? And we kind of had a bit of a laugh about that, and I kind of
the variation question on that is, when will we start expecting our politicians to act like responsible adults? When will we start expecting that our politicians actually swear an oath of office that is for the common good of the country and will uphold it, and not ignore when they stop leading with purpose?
Yeah, so it kind of brought me to that realization there about the fact that, I mean, Boris Johnson has been going since he started, because that's the nature of all things, they come and go. But the problem is that we're now drawn into, it's quite handy for the status quo, the winners of this paradigm that don't want to let go, as you've mentioned.
Oh yeah.
For them, it's almost like a show. So we have this, we go back straight down the rabbit hole of, well, who's going to be next? When what we should be doing is go, well, hang on, that whole system was wrong in the first place. When are we going to transform completely?
And that's basically the nature of my work, is really trying to accelerate and support people and change agents to discovering, experimenting, and moving towards a new way of being, a new way of leading, of thinking about communities, organizations. But one of the beautiful things, but also the frustrating thing, is that the noise of the system, because as the systems become more interdependent, there's more noise in the system. In politics, there's a whole lot of noise in our public discourse. But underneath, and that's what gets reported on our 24/7 news channels and our social media. But underneath all of that noise is a bunch of really extraordinary, exciting people like you, like me. They're all over the globe, and the pandemic has accelerated this rapidly. But there are networks building and being created, and experiments running, and the financial system and investment system is shifting. So we think that our politics are going to lead the way, but actually I think it's business, because they're more in touch with the feedback loops. They know their supply lines are going to be significantly shifted. They know that people are making choices about where they work and why. We have a whole generation of people who want to work in organizations that have a purpose that will help.
And probably want them to save their own planet, of which they're going to be a future of.
Right. So there's a lot of feedback loops in the system, and there's a lot of change and transformation going on underneath, but we're not reporting it on the news. And part of it is because it's a networked frame. It's not a hierarchical frame. We're not going to one individual leader who's the spokesperson of what's changing underneath. We're using this interdependent dynamic system of normal people who care, who are starting to organize and have been organizing. And, back in 2000, there were over 3,000 sustainability groups, but there was not one single voice. And so we couldn't really see the power of the group. But David Peat, for example, wrote a nice little book called Gentle Action. And he believes that one of the ways we tip a system is when in an interdependent system, when everybody starts showing up and shifting the way they think and act, at some point we'll reach a critical mass when all of us who are individually doing this work, all of us begin to shift. And then
absolutely. And the more, the more and more
something big will happen. And we're in a fight, because every major paradigm that falls really gets, the old paradigm gets really, really loud right before it falls and collapses. And that's what I think we're in right now.
Yeah. And that reminds me of the kind of 2008 financial collapse, which was rescued by governments. But I don't think they'll be able to rescue it this time. And yeah, it's kind of like people get ridiculous, don't they? You know, the greed becomes even worse. We're probably polluting the world more, even though we've got these, sustainability, ESG goals and things like that,
Well, I've been thinking a lot about the adjectives that people come up with for leadership, like sustainability leadership or regenerative leadership. The reason why we put an adjective in front of it is because we are saying the way we're thinking about leadership will create this outcome: regenerative, sustainable, life-giving, whatever you want to call it, ethical, but what we don't name is, we don't have an adjective on the traditional leadership. And that's what we need to start naming, because our traditional leadership is basically people who are making decisions every single day that are going to create places in our world that are unlivable. So what's that adjective that names the outcome, instead of this person who's a business leader has made a lot of money for shareholders or for himself and his C-suite. Instead of saying greedy, we should be saying greedy leadership or selfish leadership or destructive leadership, or I don't know what that adjective is, but we should name it for what it is.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point, that, because I think that quite a lot of leadership courses, I've just been working with a particular organization, I won't name it, but which is quite hierarchical. And there's a time for command and control leadership when when everyone's under pressure, but there's usually some emotional bank account stored with the team anyway. But the challenge you've got is that the people on the ground can do it. And I just think that leadership should be, there's parts of leadership, isn't there? We can call them people managers and coaches, and they're all parts of leadership, aren't they? But really, leadership is just a lever of potential, I think, almost like a catalyst. It's almost like the leadership isn't the really important thing. It's the group. Because
I've always thought that leadership wasn't about an individual, but it was about a collection, something that emerged out of the collective actions of individuals in a community or an organization or a world. And that means that leadership is something that is not attached to an individual, but it is, so in the concept of emergent properties, it's something that shows up in the whole that doesn't show up in the part. And that's what makes an emergent property. I think leadership is that way. If we paid attention, kind of like back in the 80s, there was this debate about vision, and so half of the field was thinking that to be a visionary leader, you were the person who had the vision in your head, and then you went and sold your vision to people and then attracted followers. But others, which I aligned with, said that the leader the positional leader is a person who is very deeply listens to the aspirations and hopes and dreams of the people in the organization, and then gives voice to those hopes and aspirations.
Yeah.
Which goes back to nature, in the sense that in nature, it has a very strong organizing purpose. And that purpose is to create conditions for the life of future generations. Now, what would happen if every single business person and politician said that was their purpose, their higher purpose, and that they started to lead and act from that purpose?
Mm.
So this kind of purpose frame becomes really critically important. And then, of course, what does nature do? It designs self-organization at all levels of the system, but they're self-organizing in alignment with that purpose, in support of that purpose. It's one of the things that in this visionary frame, I've been writing a new book on change, and kind of pulling out. I've been doing change work in organizations for over 40 years. I've been trying to figure out, well, what is it? What is the deep wisdom that I have learned? And one of them is that in machines, they don't change unless there's an outside force. But nature doesn't. Nature changes all the time, because that's the nature of a dynamic living system. So nature isn't focused on change or not change. Nature is focused on evolution, which is this kind of higher evolutionary purpose, the direction which organizations, well, nature wants to move. And in nature, that evolutionary biology moves us towards greater and greater diversity.
Yeah.
It moves us to greater interdependence. It moves us to greater complexity. It moves us to greater resilience, because all of those previous things create more resilient systems. And so you kind of wonder, okay, well, what if we use those as a measure instead of profit, to help us see whether our organizations are evolving, as opposed to worrying about whether they're changing or not.
So, I mean, I always go with that idea about Buckminster Fuller: don't try and fight the existing reality, create a new one that makes the old one obsolete, which kind of very much is similar to what you're saying about how the network of change agents, if you like. Yeah, I work for an intelligence agency overseas somewhere, and you tell them these great ideas, and they go, they're great, but when we go back, we've got all these new leadership ideas and teamwork ideas. Yeah, great, go make the coffee. It's a tick box exercise, and this is what bigger organizations do, I think. And so I remember having this conversation about, well, you're all secret agents anyway, now you're going to be secret change agents. So what do you if you're in a situation, do you think, so we can talk about leaders, but we know that the change comes from behaviors of the people. What can individuals do who may feel disempowered because they're part of an organization? They can't leave their job because, you know, this, you have to have mastery of both worlds. You've got to survive in this world. There's no point. I find a lot of eco-pessimists are turning around and saying to the tech cap, you know, optimists, so it's all right, well, just technology will sort it all out. And then there's eco-pessimists asking for them to change, and they won't change. So what can individuals do, do you think, when they're in situations where they're stuck between the old they're stuck in the old paradigm, but they want to make changes, do you think?
There are two things. One is mental and one is emotional. So in your mental work, you have to start seeing what's really there and whether it's something that will nourish the system or the organization or not. And even if you have an evil boss, you can stop the spread of that evil by trying to, from your position downward in the organization, trying to create things that a system or an environment, a habitat for your employees where they can thrive. The second is that we have to work on our own active hope. So one of the things about having chaotic political leaders in our life is that we begin to think that the social fabric of our world and our societies are falling apart. And when we lose hope, we don't show up in the same way. So there's this comes from Joanna Macy's work, that, when you can be hopeless, which means you don't do anything because nothing you do will matter. You can be passively hopeful, meaning you can't do anything, but maybe somebody will come in and rescue the system. So you look for charismatic leaders and vote for them or whatever. Or you can cultivate active hope, which is really having the ability to imagine a better future. And then whether you believe you can make a difference or not, you show up and behave every day in alignment with that future that you want to create. That's an emotional frame. It's really about the emotion of hope. And it's then added to that is kind of a discipline of saying, I'm going to show up and act in alignment with a better future that I see, believe in, care about. And when enough of us do that in an interdependent world, we will tip the system because there will be no other option. So that's a very simple frame that it doesn't require power or position or money or resources. Those are all gathered from your own internal resources.
I think that's very, very powerful, and it kind of gives people autonomy and agency within the environment that they're in. But again, a bit, you've got your monthly meetup of people, and I think that's important, is to go out and outside of your system and find other people who are doing the work, or
yeah, I love that. I call it being in good company. So,
yes.
You know, who do you want to hang out with, and and those people will help you. It's always easier to take a risk when other people are standing alongside of you, taking a risk with you. So having, look at who you're hanging out with. Are you hanging out with people who think that the world is hopeless, and therefore I can go buy an AK-47 and shoot it up because I'm frustrated? I mean, really? Is that where you want to hang out? Or,
yeah,
I mean, I think in the US we have so many mass shootings, but a lot of that is because we have people who basically think everything's fallen apart. So then I'm the only thing that matters, and my needs and my will is the only thing that I should care about. And so it rationalizes all kinds of crazy choices and actions. So, and I think currently we have a lot of messages coming from the old paradigm that are really trying to maintain hopelessness in the population.
Yeah.
They're saying, nobody can really change this except the politicians, and the politicians are in gridlock. So we're all sitting back waiting as if the
exactly.
politicians will get their
point about
act
the
together.
eco-pessimists have to stop asking and be more.
So we got to show up, basically, is my thinking. And so every day, it's not necessarily that every day I have this kind of hopeful or active hope, because there are days when you look at what's going on in the news, you think, oh boy, we are in trouble.
We're all doomed. Yeah.
But you have to move past that. And one of the beautiful realities of my life is that I work with people who are really trying to make a difference in the world. And so when I juxtapose the people I interact with what's being presented of our society in the news cycle, they're very different realities. And so one way we could cultivate and support our active hope would be to really look at the joy and the graciousness and the generosity of the people around us, and what they're working for as a way of fueling and supporting our active hope.
Very good. Well, I think that's a great place to leave it, Kathy. Thank you very much. I'll leave copies of where they can find your book, and I look forward to reading the next one, and also your monthly meetup as well. I'll put a link.
You're going to come and talk to us in August, right?
Yes, I'm a quiet taste, but if you want me there, I'll be there.
Yeah, we want you there. So that'll be great.
Great stuff. Thanks for chatting to me. Cheers.
You're welcome. Take care.